So the Conservative Party have broadly pushed the ball into the Gambling Commission's court and said, whilst they can't really comment at all on an ongoing investigation, there are significant enough questions about the conduct of these two parliamentary candidates such that they have suspended them. The question from a lot of people is that these questions were raised about 2 weeks ago. So why has it taken quite so long to take a decision to suspend them in this instance, or to not even suspend them, to remove their support from their campaign?
How common are political bets of this nature, alleged political bets of this nature? And what could happen with these investigations? What outcomes could we possibly see?
So it's quite an extraordinary scandal, if you will, because whilst, of course, you can bet on politics and you can bet on the outcome of politics in the same way that you can bet on the outcome of sporting events. You don't often hear about people betting in such a way on politics. So it's quite without precedent. In terms of a UK political scandal, particularly because I suppose it just seems so silly. Frankly, you've got people directly involved with the political process making a bet on an outcome which they have privileged information to. One thing that we know about the British political system is that the timing of the election is in the Prime Minister's power. Therefore, anybody within the Prime Minister's inner circle has that kind of privileged information. So it's without precedent. And there are, significant issues that can arise from this, and legal issues that can arise from this. So whilst we might be frustrated that the Conservative Party are ever so slightly pushing that ball into the Gambling Commission's court, you can also understand that there are likely to be ongoing legal issues at play here, and the police are becoming involved. So, significant legal outcomes as well.
Well, the timing is really key. How much of an impact could this all have at the polls, which are just around the corner on July the 4th?
It could be incredibly significant. What we often forget, especially people like me who are academics and involved in the electoral process, is that elections particularly are as much a test of character and of personality as they are of specific policies. And if we then couple that with the fact that the Conservative Party are really struggling in the polls, issues and mistakes like this gambling problem, and also Rishi Sunak leaving the D-Day commemorations early, only serve to damage the Conservatives' electoral prospects much more significantly than they might already do. It's a bit like, to use a sporting analogy, with the T20 going on at the moment, it's a bit like that required run rate ticking up and up for the Conservatives. And what you really need to start doing, if you're the Conservative Party, is to hit those sixes. Instead, they keep on swinging and getting hit middle stump time after time after time. So it's going to be a real problem for the Conservative Party leading up to an election. They need to make up that ground, and they're only losing it.
Well, I'm not going to weigh into the sport analogy there, but you have argued that this crisis reflects a Conservative Party that is drained after 14 years in power. Can you expand on that and share your thoughts with us?
Yeah, precisely. This is so it's just, as I said, an extraordinary scenario, and frankly, just stupid to bet on the outcome of an election when you have that kind of privileged information, alongside a series of avoidable campaign mistakes for the Conservative Party, who, as we've already discussed, are way behind in the polls, leaving the D-Day commemorations early, announcing the election in the pouring rain. Just a lot of very bad decisions made by the Conservative campaign. And what I suggest is that this is just indicative of a Conservative Party that are just tired. They are tired of governing. They've been at this for 14 years. And what we know from our political history books is if you've been in power for a long time, quite often you do just get tired. You make silly mistakes that you wouldn't do when you're fresh and when you're eager, and when you're perhaps in opposition. So they are, I suggested, I've talked about cricket, I'll move on to football where England aren't doing much better, frankly. They're a bit like a tired English football team, somewhat out of ideas, doing the same thing again and again to diminishing returns.
So how big a gamble was it for Rishi Sunak to call elections this early? Was that a mistake? I mean, he had until January the 28th to set a date, but he's gone for July the 4th.
It was a really big call, frankly, and I suspect when the post-mortems come, one of the things he's going to be criticised for is going now when he really didn't need to. Frankly, there was probably not a good time for the Conservatives to go and call an election. As I said, they are tired. They've been 14 years in power. It's hard to pin the multitude of issues that we have in the UK on anyone else but the Conservative Party. They're a damaged brand after Partygate and Liz Truss. So there wasn't a good time to go, but the general received wisdom, and there's a reason why wisdom is received, is sometimes it's quite wise, is to hold on for as long as possible, or at least until October, for hopefully things to turn around and for perhaps something to happen which might change the electoral calculus. It's quite incredible for a prime minister to call an election when you're about 20 points behind in the polls. So it was a big call. It was a big gamble. We're talking about betting. It's unlikely it's going to pay off.
Well, the fact that Labour opposition leader Keir Starmer appears to be doing well in the polls, as you say, is that more of a reflection of the unpopularity of the Conservatives?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we know, sort of digging into the polls a little bit, is that the Conservatives and Rishi Sunak's leader ratings are incredibly low. Trust in issues like the economy, which are very important, incredibly low as well. But if we look at, leader ratings on the other side, we know that Keir Starmer is not setting anyone on fire here. He's not, galvanising an electorate. He's frankly playing it quite safe because that's all he needs to do. So it strikes me that what we're seeing is as much an anti-Conservative vote, or in fact much more an anti-Conservative vote, as it is a pro-Labour vote. And it's quite likely as well, we'll have to wait for the post-mortems of the election, that we see an increase in tactical voting at this election. And that would support this, that when we look back on this election, what we'll see it as is a boot the Conservatives out and the Labour are the next best option, as opposed to we need this Labour Party that we're incredibly enthusiastic about to be in power. That will present significant challenges for Keir Starmer when he is in Downing Street, but I suspect he's not too worried about that at this particular time.
How has campaigning been going so far? What have the highlights been? Any words of wisdom imparted?
So the highlights are much more, frankly, the lowlights, and that is, I think, what this campaign will be remembered for is the astonishing gaffes. What we see when we look at measures of cut through, right? So that is the stories of the campaign that people, again, that aren't following day to day, have heard about. Largely, what we're hearing is things about gambling, about so-called Gamblegate, and Rishi Sunak leaving the D-Day commemorations early. Much of everything else is kind of falling off a little bit, and we also see this in, for example, TV ratings over the debates, around the debates. TV ratings are about a tenth. Maybe slightly more than that, but about a tenth what they were in, for example, 2010, and much less than what they were in 2019. And let's face it, significantly less than the ratings around the football. So in terms of cut through, it's actually the mistakes that are cutting through, not anything, again, that's setting the electorate on fire. So this all just adds to that stew that this is a big problem for Rishi Sunak. Something like this gambling scandal is a big problem. But also that this isn't an election that's necessarily infusing the electorate in a way that even perhaps 2019, where there was a significant, Brexit and Remain argument going on, did.
Well, we've got a week to find out how this all plays out at the polls. Sam Power, great to get your thoughts. Thanks so much.
Thanks ever so much for having me.